Okay, so Christy, I'm gonna let you start recording, and here we go. Oh, there's Lois Sable. Good to see you, Lois. Welcome, everybody. This is our sixth talk for 2021. And I'm Mary Lou Rostilsky from the board of the Yakima Sylvan Neighbors Network. And our network supports and connects people who want to stay in their homes and neighborhoods and engaged in the community. And I think most of you know that we try to develop programs to connect us with each other, help build new friendships, and we also offer needed services within the scope of our volunteers. So thanks everybody for supporting us, and we hope many of you already are or will become members. And we also want to really specially thank our sponsors, Tri-Ply Construction, and most recently, the Conover Insurance Company is sponsoring us. And we also thank the Yakima Valley Community Foundation, the United Way of Central Washington, and the Latino Community Fund of Washington for their grant they gave us through the Resilience and Response Program. So we are very happy to have Brooke here today to talk about the Yakima Symphony. And Chrissy's going to talk just a minute about some logistics. And then we will get started, and Inga Wheel is going to be introducing Brooke.
Good afternoon. I'm Chrissy, the program manager, and we are going to talk about, we are recording one, because that's always fun to have on our website to look back later. Two, that means if you don't want your image during the recording, you may go to stop video. Three, tonight we're going to do it a little different. Brooke is okay with having questions during the presentation. So Mary Lou is going to keep track of who's raising their hand in your frame. But there's also a way to do it.
Well, let's just do it.
Let's just do it in your frame. So if you have a question, we can do it that way.
Larry's showing us how you can do it with the little symbol too, but I'm going to be looking for real hands.
Yep. We will also send a survey feedback afterwards and the video at the end later this evening after I do all that. We're going to now go to Inga, who is going to introduce Brooke. And thank you for being here tonight. Well, this afternoon. Inga.
Okay, well, I will be very pleased to introduce Brooke, and pleased above all else that he has stayed all these years, because what happened that year Brooke came in 1967, I had been at the college just for 1 year, and for some reason been asked to head up a faculty improvement program. Now, I laugh at the term as I think about it now, but at the time I took that quite seriously, thinking that there might indeed be all sorts of room for improvement. And so Brooke arrived that fall as a musician, and we had been given 3 special guest lecturers that year. In the spring and in the winter and spring, we had an artist, and we had a drama major. But Brooke came in the fall, and so he fell right into this faculty improvement program. And we got together some meetings, which we held in the town and gown room on the campus, and which was a large room with large windows and very welcoming and very pleasant. And we had some really good gatherings there. Now, Brooke decided to stay, and for that, I have personally been most pleased, as of course the school has been pleased. So we are glad to have you today, Brooke, and looking forward to what you have to tell us about the symphony.
Excellent. I do have to say, I'm hearing a little bit of echo. I want to make sure no one has an extra device on that will cause an echo. So does anyone have an extra computer on or a phone?
Your computer's still on, is it?
No, no, it's not. The phone's off.
Okay.
Okay. Now, okay. Brooke.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. when I was asked to do this, I decided that there's sort of a legend that I was the person who started the Yakima Symphony. And it's true that when I first drove into the city around Labor Day 1967, Yakima did not have a functioning orchestra. And that year we did put together a small chamber orchestra that eventually grew into the symphony we now enjoy. But truth to tell, there is a long history of orchestras playing symphonic music in the Yakima Valley. It's even older than Yakima itself, and it reveals a history of practicing and appreciating the high art of classical music. In the beginning, there was music. There you go, yeah. It begins with the arrival of a fellow with a violin, Charles Carpenter, a native of Vermont, was an entrepreneur who was instrumental in establishing the hops industry in the Upper Valley. Not to mention the First National Bank of Old Yakima and the First National Bank of the new city of Yakima, which he served as director and as vice president for 26 years. But Mr. Carpenter was also a formidable musician, and he formed his own orchestra for which he composed music. And judging from the account in his obituary, his orchestra wasn't what we would label as a symphony orchestra necessarily. We do not know just what the instrumentation was, but we do know it was a flexible group who performed, quote, the first social dancing party ever held in Yakima country, as well as formal concerts like this one in the Centennial Hall, which I assume was in what is now Union Gap, but I haven't been able to find it, make that for sure about that. Here we see a program from a concert in 1881 in which, quote, Carpenter's orchestra appeared along with other individual musicians, trumpeter, singers, a pianist. I spy the names of the composers Offenbach and Rossini. So they were presenting serious symphonic composers and operatic composers. But then we get to the next chapter in this story, and I call it the FREIMUTH era. The year before Charles Carpenter died in 1918, a real powerhouse of a musician moved to Yakima, and that's what began the AP era of AP FREIMUTH. Adolf Paul FREIMUTH was born in Potsdam, Germany. When his family moved to the United States, he stayed behind to study music. He left Germany around 1886, probably because he preferred not to be drafted into the Kaiser's army. He was quite peripatetic, living and working in Los Angeles, British Columbia, Alaska, and Seattle before he landed in Yakima in 1917, invited by Frederick Mercy. He had been very active as a violinist, a trumpet player, a conductor, and a bandmaster. Just before crossing the hill to Central Washington, he was involved in the reorganization of the Seattle Symphony, in which he was the concertmaster. Adolf Paul FREIMUTH came to Yakima in 1917 to be musical director of the Mercy Amusement Company. He led the Empire Theater Orchestra, who played for Mercy's presentation of silent movies. As this photo shows, he did not stop at that. His daughter, Pat FREIMUTH, who shared this photo with me, Pat FREIMUTH, who shared this photo with me, along with lots of other AP memorabilia. On the back of this photo is handwritten the names of the players, and on a card attached to the photograph is the title, First Yakima Symphony Orchestra, 1917. When the Capitol Theater opened in 1920, of course, the chief, as he was known by then as the chief, became its musical director, for which he was well prepared. Before coming to the Pacific Northwest, he had toured the United States conducting the orchestra of a vaudeville company. it's obvious that A.P. FREIMUTH was the dominant force in Yakima's music for at least 2 decades. He formed bands and he played in bands. He organized and conducted the Yakima Community Orchestra and the Yakima Symphony Club. He also established, with the new Yakima Valley Junior College, an award-winning student orchestra, which I believe was called the Yakima Little Symphony. And here's that orchestra in Victoria, BC, where they went and won the top honors in a competition. He didn't stop there, by the way. He also formed and led, and I never knew there had been such a thing existed, formed and led a Grandview Sunnyside Orchestra, and of course, the Capitol Theater Orchestra that played for touring vaudeville and other acts. He's credited with organizing a group that was then known as Rotary Boys Band, which evolved into the first Yakima High School band, and which is now the Davis High School Band. He also played trumpet in service club bands, and service club bands in those days were really quite large ensembles. The end of the FREIMUTH era is not clear. His daughter Pat reports that he stopped conducting when he lost his eyesight around 1945, but he continued to play, especially in bands. And of course, knowing the trumpet part from memory, he actually, even in failing eyesight, he would march with the band for marching type of occasions. There is a news story from 1967 that he founded the Yakima Scottish Rite Orchestra in 1919 and continued conducting all its concerts until the late 50s. That's the only, I've only found that in one place, but that's the story. There's a Yakima Herald feature story on the chief in 1967, just a few months, several months before I came to Yakima, with a picture of him still playing the trumpet at the age of 94, I believe. He lived 4 more years. Now we come to the community orchestra era. And Yakima, and the story becomes sort of more mercurial. It's hard to get too many serious starting and stopping dates. This is a Yakima Civic Symphony Orchestra in KIT. We have that picture. This is a newspaper story dated May 1st of 1939. It's a float with a photo of the Yakima Civic Symphony Orchestra, which was sponsored, they say, by a year earlier by Yakima Valley Junior College. Sponsored is a curious verb to use, but the photograph result is clear. The orchestra numbered 45 players, age 13 to, quote, more than 50. No one, including the conductor, Ivan Putman, was paid. Mr. Putman was an instructor at the college in music, theater, and speech. And as you can see here, the Yakima Civic Symphony Orchestra played 4 half-hour programs broadcast by radio KIT in the May of 1939. And you can see from this program that the orchestra also played live concerts. This one, I believe, was at the Methodist Church. Some of you will notice the soloist for this performance was another iconic Yakima musician, Gerald Wilson, who founded the Wilson School of Music, which was on North 8th Avenue. The Yakima Valley Civic Symphony was dormant during the war years, but we do have a program from 1947 attesting to the orchestra's reincarnation. After the war, Harvey Meyer was the conductor, and the word civic in its name was dropped, leaving it the Yakima Symphony Orchestra. Again, none of the performers were paid. The personnel list on this program includes Dolores Plath and Dolores Armstrong. Some of you may remember them. 20 years later, Dolores Armstrong was the first person to sit as concertmaster in the first concert of that Yakima Chamber Orchestra in 1967. And then things get a little more murky. We have a Yakima Valley Philharmonic Association, which I believe was primarily a choral organization. But as we see on this program, from 1948, it has its own symphony orchestra under the leadership of a George Perkins. Mr. Perkins, a graduate of Eastman, lived in Yakima for 2 years, teaching privately, perhaps at the Wilson School, I'm not sure. And then he settled in Powell, Wyoming, where he taught at a community college there. I think the Philharmonic Association continued to function into the 60s, but I haven't found documents to show for it. I recall hearing references to it during my early years in Yakima. We do have a concert program for a Yakima Valley Symphony Orchestra from 1947, which may have been a function of the Philharmonic Association. Next comes another Yakima Valley Civic Symphony, which played its first season in 1956-57. The conductor was William Druckenmiller, a flutist who taught music in the public schools. The concertmaster was William Herbst, and William Herbst is the concertmaster in this photo. He was the supervisor of music for the public schools. And as you can see, the orchestra was quite large, very well populated. Now here's the murky part. Mysteriously, in 1960, Mr. Druckenmiller was just gone, just nowhere to be seen in print. And Mr. Herbst was the conductor. There was definitely some intrigue involved. I'm sure of that because the scars were still apparent when I arrived in Yakima in 1967. Mr. Druckenmiller just passes out of the scene entirely, but his supporters were still seething, I dare say. When I talked Bill Herbst into joining the Yakima Chamber Orchestra in 1968, several string players instantly disappeared and made it clear, including in one difficult telephone call, that they would not make music on the same stage with Mr. Herbst. Now, we can trace the life and death of this iteration of the Civic Symphony by listing the venues, the halls where they performed. Originally, that's 1950s, the late 1950s, they played in the 1,600 seat theater in Davis High School. By 1964, they moved to the College Theater with a seating capacity of 300, not to mention abominable acoustics. And in 1965, we find the orchestra at the Warehouse Theater with its 200 seat capacity. When people described its demise to me in my first year in Yakima, they reported that in the orchestra's final seasons, there were more people on the stage than in the audience. The final birth of the Yakima Symphony Orchestra. The summer of 1967, I was recruited by the president of Wenatchee Valley College to accept a one-year appointment along with a dramatist and a visual artist on a Department of Education grant to serve YVC, Wenatchee Valley College, and Columbia Basin College. This is the program that Inga was referring to. I must say that when I say I was recruited, I'm not tooting my own double bass. I was barely qualified for such an assignment. But the Wenatchee Valley College president was tasked with hiring the musician, and he had simply run out of candidates by midsummer 1967. He was pretty desperate. He got my curriculum vitae from Eastern Washington State College. He contacted me and interviewed me during a stop in the Detroit airport. I decided to give it a go. I was on schedule to begin my PhD program in the fall, but I had been in school for 20 years straight, and getting a paycheck for doing music for a year sounded kind of exciting. For the grant, each of us visiting artists would spend 1 quarter on a campus and then rotate around the triangle. It was not at all clear what each of the colleges wanted us to do. Lucky for me, I began fall quarter in Yakima. When I asked what I was to do, there was some hemming and hawing but the chairman of the Department of Creative Arts, Ruth Miller, who some of you definitely will remember, suggested that perhaps I could organize an orchestra because for the past few years, Yakima had not had a functioning orchestra despite some efforts to get one back on stage. I liked the idea. I was given names of some players of the extinct orchestras, and I started working the telephone. The Schockler family helped identify musicians, and as I remember, made some contacts themselves. In a week or so, we had enough musicians to call a rehearsal. We agreed to one rehearsal a week and put together a program that fit the instrumentation, the instruments in the orchestra, sort of. I say sort of because from one rehearsal to the next, we could never be sure who was actually going to show up. I never saw the full orchestra at one time until the final rehearsal before its first performance in late November 1967. And we almost didn't have a full orchestra even on performance night. The closer we got to the first downbeat, the more nervous I got because the first bassoonist was missing. I phoned him and asked if he would be coming to the performance, to which he responded, quote, "Do you want me to?" I was polite, he showed up. After that inaugural performance night, we planned on a performance in each of the next 2 college quarters, with me commuting back to Yakima weekly from Pasco in the winter quarter and Wenatchee in the spring. Now, allow me to get completely off the subject for 30 seconds. I will say that the trips from Wenatchee in the spring left me one of the most memorable visions from all my years in the valley. Driving north toward the canyon at 10 o'clock at night, we drove through apple orchards and witnessed smudging. Normal as that would be to a native Yakimite, to this kid from east of the Mississippi, it was an eerie sort of magic. Well, toward the end of the academic year, the head of the instrumental program at YBC, Bill Wood, announced his intent to leave Yakima to take a position in Ohio. I had fairly good reason to believe that the position could be mine if I gave up the plan to return to Michigan. And I chose to stay in Yakima, teach at the college, and try to keep the orchestra playing. The Yakima Chamber Orchestra struggled on. We played 3 concerts a season, mostly in the college theater. We had stalwart members such as in the Schocklers, Gay Dawley, Mary Lou Thomas, Roger Finch, the Al Geyers, eventually oboist composer Douglas Knott, but lots of positions were unstable in this amateur orchestra. Strings were the weakest population. I became pretty good at finding compositions that did not include violins. Bill Herbst of Yakima Symphony history agreed to join as concertmaster, a very important musical move given his ability on the violin. Concertmaster is second in command of an orchestra. A good concertmaster plays a major role for the quality with which an orchestra plays. Bill Herbst's time with the Yakima Symphony Orchestra and what became later the Symphony Orchestra was really critical to our successes. Bill also played a starring role in the very significant transition of the chamber orchestra to the symphony orchestra. In March of 1970, the Washington Music Educators State Convention was scheduled for Yakima. As supervisor of music in the Yakima School District, Bill was responsible for programming what I recall was titled Local Night. That was usually an evening of various school choirs, bands, and orchestras from the host school district. Bill suggested that instead of presenting the student ensembles, he could turn the evening over to the Yakima Chamber Orchestra. I jumped at the chance. This meant we would play a full evening program on the stage of the Capitol Theater with a guaranteed audience of delegates to the convention, plus our own Yakima audience. Financially, it would be something of a challenge. The quality of the music making had to be a notch or two or 3 or 4 above what we had achieved on our first 3 seasons in order to catch the attention of the Yakima portion of the audience. That meant resorting to a tactic that community orchestras use routinely called ringers. A ringer is a professional player, usually from a professional orchestra within driving distance. The locals rehearse on their regular weekly schedule, which is a very inefficient way of doing things. And the ringers come in for a final rehearsal and the performance. We hired about half a dozen members of the Seattle Symphony Orchestra string section, and I rehearsed them the afternoon of the concert. The only glitch was that as I got ready for the only rehearsal I would have with the Seattle players, I discovered that the student assistant had not brought the box of music with their parts to the theater. I challenged the speed of light, getting to the campus and back, and with time left for some rehearsal. And I did not get a speeding ticket. This is a photo of a rehearsal for the 6 vocal soloists on that program. And I think you'll remember quite a few of these people. In front there is Alita Adams, who's singing soprano. Behind her is Virginia Prochnow. In the shadow is Dorothy Post, Dr. Lee Gormley, and somebody named Charles. I can't remember his last name, but he was temporarily the director of the Perry Technical Institute, and then Jim Meyer. The program was devoted to Beethoven, who was cooperated by having been born 200 years before. 1970 was the Beethoven bicentennial. The soloist in Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto was pianist Istvan Nadas, a recent addition to Wazoo's faculty. We opened with Beethoven's Eighth Symphony, and for the finale, we combined the choruses of Davis High School, Eisenhower High School, and Yakima Valley Community College for a short, rousing, but rather odd piece of music known as the Choral Fantasy for piano, orchestra, and chorus. It worked. Now that night Yakima, saw or rather heard the possibility of establishing a symphony orchestra for their community. And this is crucial to establishing and keeping an orchestra of any caliber. Musicians make the music, but they should not also have to run the organization. In fact, that almost never works. And that was what was going on with the declining Yakima Valley Civic Symphony. In the next few months, a nonprofit corporation was created with a board of directors to support what we would now call the Yakima Symphony Orchestra. So articles of incorporation, that's not a very exciting photo, but incorporating as a tax-exempt not-for-profit organization is a necessary step in establishing stability. It's not insurance. The Yakima Valley Civic Symphony incorporated in 1939, and as we've seen, it ultimately failed. We opened in the 1970-71 season as the Yakima Symphony Orchestra, operated by a corporation fancifully named Patrons of Music. It was Patrons of Music for its first 10 years of life. The major next step on the ladder up to a stable professional orchestra came in the 1973-74 season. The Spokane Symphony Orchestra had a bent for serving all of Washington east of the Cascades through tours of its chamber orchestra, playing school concerts sponsored by the State Arts Commission. In 1975, its music director, Donald Tulane, proposed a residency of the Spokane Chamber Orchestra in Yakima, capped by a concert of the two orchestras together. This became Orchestra Week, which had a 4-year run. Orchestra Week included school concerts, sectional rehearsals led by the Spokane professionals, and side-by-side rehearsals culminating in a concert with the orchestras side by side. Even more important than Orchestra Week itself was the year-round relationship that developed between the two orchestras. And this is unique in the history of orchestras in the United States, I'm fairly sure. Our players got a taste of how professional music is done, but even more important to the maturing of the organization was that the Spokane Symphony Orchestra literally trained two of our managers and its music director. Now, I have to slow down just a little bit to define those two titles, or two of those titles, or two titles. In a fully organized United States Symphony Orchestra, the conductor is just the musician who is on the podium for rehearsals and concerts. The conductor may be a guest or may be the local conductor, but the music director is the artistic CEO, responsible for setting and carrying out all artistic policies, helping raise financial support, determining the artistic level of the orchestra, and hiring and firing players to suit those criteria. I had played in community and professional orchestras, but being a player is a far cry from knowing the whats and the hows of operating a professional orchestra. I spent a month in 1976 during the Spokane World Fair studying the art of conducting with Don Tulane and hanging out at the Spokane Symphony Orchestra offices, rehearsals, and performances. Meanwhile, back in Yakima, the board wrestled with some extremely important decisions. First came the most significant decision of its 8-year existence. It was time to pay its players. We had been operating as a ringer orchestra. The locals played a series of rehearsals and the ringers came in for the dress rehearsal and the concert. That did not end abruptly, but as of 1976 and 77, the board decided we would pay principal players. Principal means first set chair and section leader. They're the leaders of each of the string sections and the oboes and the bassoons and the horns, etc. Now to finance this change, we had to give up Orchestra Week. And to their credit, the Spokane Symphony remained a mentor organization of the Yakima Symphony Orchestra. It would be a few years more, 1979-80, till we decided to pay all players, but that's the beginning of a whole different chapter. It may seem wonkish, and excuse me for that, to elaborate on acoustics and audience capacity and general purpose of an orchestra's venue, but those considerations play critical roles in the evolution of a successful professional orchestra. In 1976, the YSO moved from the 300-seat College Theater to the auditorium at Perry Technical Institute, which had, excuse me, a larger audience capacity. Among other issues, this was a move from the extraordinarily dry acoustics of the College Theater to a 100% cement room that was home to a wrestling arena every Monday night. We would joke that Perry's acoustics were so lively that if we played a really good dress rehearsal, we wouldn't have to show up for the concert. Here's how a week at Perry worked out. You can see in the upper left photo, the wrestling on Monday night. Starting on Tuesday, bottom photo below that, the staff and students at Perry built a stage. And by Thursday, I think, was our first rehearsal. We had a stage and stands and instrument, and we were rehearsing for a Saturday evening concert. Now we come to two crises that ensured the musical growth and the financial stability of the Yakima Symphony. August 19th, 1975 was a really bad day for the world of symphonic music. The great Russian composer Dmitri Shostakovich died, and the Capitol Theater burned. That left only Davis High School Auditorium, and a few large church sanctuaries available for musical events that drew sizable audiences. Inevitably, the question arose whether it may be time for the orchestra to make the Capitol our home venue. It would be a risky move, considering that the orchestra had never had to pay rent for the venues in which we performed, except for the very few occasions when we did a major choral work like Messiah or Brahms' German Requiem, in which we did in the Capitol. Nor had we ever incurred stagehand expenses. Of course, at the Capitol, every time we rehearsed or performed would cost us rent, as well as the expenses of professional stage technicians. This was a critical decision for the board of directors, who have the fiduciary responsibility for the organization. Following serious discussion, they made the crucial decision to take the orchestra to its ultimate home, the Capitol Theater. We played our 1978-79 season entirely in the Capitol. At first, our early rehearsals took place weekly at Davis High School, and we moved to the Capitol just for the two final rehearsals, the weekend of our Saturday evening performances. This arrangement was financially careful, but soon the musicians convinced the board that by doing all the rehearsals on stage would be a significant artistic step forward. With that, the rehearsal schedule was fit into a single week. Remember, we started by rehearsing for 2 months at a time, once a week, which of course, a long way from the old community orchestra format of once a week rehearsals, which of course gave everyone time enough to forget what last week's rehearsals had accomplished. The YAKIMA Symphony Orchestra had begun as a small ensemble of volunteers who may or may not show up for rehearsals being held once a week, and after 2 months of those rehearsals, performing in theaters more suitable to plays or wrestling matches. Now, its corporate management had decided to graduate the YSO to a completely paid orchestra that rehearsed and performed in the best hall in Eastern Washington, if not at that time, the entire state of Washington. Actually, for a while, the YAKIMA Symphony was the only professional orchestra that held all rehearsals in the acoustic in which it performed. There is one more chapter in the story that demonstrates reaching the critical criterion for a stable professional symphony orchestra. It lives in a community that really wants it and will support it. In the half decade from the first orchestra week to moving completely into the Capitol, the orchestra's budget had grown fast. YAKIMA had never supported a professional performing arts company. We always got acts and concerts and musicians and whatnot who were on the road. On average, ticket sales pay only half the cost of the performance. In the United States, where there is no significant government support of performing arts, part of the board of directors' fiduciary responsibility is raising the revenue to cover costs. By the mid-1980s, the YSO was in a predictable financial crisis. Fortunately, the right people were heading the board of directors. In 1985, board president Gail Weaver and vice president Len Borchers called 3 consecutive nights of board meetings. Every member of the board was required to attend at least one of those meetings. But the staff, that is to say, me, the music director, and the executive director, were not allowed to participate. Gail and Len laid out the numbers and challenged the directors to accept their responsibility to raise revenue or lose the orchestra. Within the next several months, half of the board resigned, and new names appeared on the list of board members. It was a new chapter in the history of Yakima's orchestra. Here are two documents that demonstrate, two sets of documents that demonstrate the difference between a community orchestra and a professional orchestra. This is from the Yakima Valley Civic Symphony in 1956, asking for financial support. It's a nice letter. It's very, it doesn't get around to asking for the support until toward the end of the letter. And of course, there is no real actual interpersonal content in this this way of trying to support or get revenue for the orchestra. Then here we go with what happened with this new set of board of directors who are very serious about raising money. This is one of the ways we've presented money. This is I call this my Dick Twist page. He suggested that we get supporters of specific positions in the orchestra, and he said I can do that. He said that just before I left town for a month trip across the country to play in a music festival in upstate New York, and I thought, what fat chance, you know. I got home 1 month later, and this was the result. He had sold the entire all of the principal positions in the orchestra. The next one is a form of gaining revenue by getting subscribers to for other aspects of the organization, and generally at a higher level than the principal's positions, supporting principal's positions. But here's the really exciting one, I think. That is a list from, I'm not sure what, 92, of the number of people who were individually supporting the Yakima Symphony Orchestra. This demonstrates what community support really is and means for a professional orchestra. The new board members became the leadership. The orchestra became stronger musically, because the economics made it possible in at least these critical ways. One, we were no longer a ringer orchestra. Two, the talent pool from which we recruited players, which had been pretty much exclusively Yakima, we recruited players that talent pool extended to Ellensburg, then Seattle, Spokane, and Portland. The entire roster played every rehearsal and in the acoustic in which we performed. Four, the repertory expanded into literature compositions we would never have tackled before as a community ringer orchestra. And we entered into a 10-year partnership with Seattle Opera. And last but not least, we paid our players and paid our bills. Now, I'm not being purposely wry by calling the next step peaceful transition of power, although it has a sort of a ring to it these days. It's a credit to the Yakima Board of Directors of the Yakima Symphony Orchestra that when I retired, the organization was strong enough not just to keep the orchestra going, but to take it into a new era in which the quality of music making continues to grow and community support grows with it. Chrissy, do we have that last? Yeah, there we go. This is a photograph by Gary Miller of the orchestra just a few seasons ago. Orchestras change music directors sometimes very explosively, but this orchestra had his organization to be together, ready to go to the next step. Sort of, I have to point one thing out. This is way after I was no longer associated with the orchestra, but the arrow there of that violinist in the back of the first violin section, that is Pat FREIMUTH, A.P. FREIMUTH's oldest daughter, who that sort of completes the circle. She played until just very recently. Was playing in the orchestra. She was an award-winning violinist in her youth, and then taught music in San Francisco, the Los Angeles area for her entire career, and then came back to retire here in the Valley. And there she is playing in the current form of Yakima's Symphony Orchestra. So if I haven't bored you too much, and if you have questions, I'm open.
Inga, go.
Well, Brooke, you didn't mention, and nor did I, how many years you were engaged with the symphony. I mean, you came in '67, and of course the symphony wasn't there, but then you got very involved and played a dominant role for just how many years?
42 years of the symphony, of its being a symphony orchestra.
Oh, wow.
Well, good for you. That's a long time.
Thelma?
I was there from the beginning, you know.
Yes.
And I wondered who wrote the grant request that brought the three of you to the college, just so I can tell my story with credibility.
No, I don't know who wrote that
I
grant.
thought it was Ruth Miller.
It may have been. It may have been.
And we were good friends, and that was her heart's desire to bring a symphony orchestra to Yakima.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I wondered. I just.
Very well may be. It was her suggestion at the beginning.
Mhm.
Of course, she didn't know what kind of a musician was going to show up.
No, she did. She did.
Oh,
But no, it's just possible that she would.
Mhm. I think she did.
other questions? You need to unmute yourself.
So did Pat, so what happened to some of the, well, I guess people take their instruments with them. I mean, maybe not when they pass away. What happened to some of the instruments? I mean, did the museum get some of the original? How does that work?
Oh, the players own their own instruments.
Yeah, but did some of the family donate any of their? I mean, with the fire, was some things lost there, or I mean, or am I missing
Well,
something?
String instruments, a good string instrument never dies.
True.
Right. I agree.
And I don't know if the museum has any of that sort of thing. I don't know what happened, for instance, with Pappy FREIMUTH's trumpet,
Mhm.
which he was playing to the age of age of 94.
Mhm.
If you don't mind, I have another question. Who decides the chair seating?
Oh, the music director.
Right, the music director.
Yeah. Right.
One person, huh?
Pardon me? One person? Yes.
One person.
Pretty much, yes. There will be a contract, and we do have a contract that has policies and processes for that to happen, and we all orchestras these days have blind auditions. Auditions are heard by usually a committee from the orchestra plus the music director, and those musicians never see the auditioners.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and perhaps until perhaps it's for a principal position or something, and they get down to the last two possibilities. But generally, it's all blind auditions.
Linda.
Yeah, I was very interested in your discussion of this whole concept of the artistic director. And I'm not sure when that started or even now. Is the artistic director the same as the music director, or does Yakima Symphony have an artistic director?
No. Music director, if I said artistic director, I misspoke. The idea of a music director, basically a czar,
Right.
an autocrat, started in the I think it really took off in the United States in the early or middle part of the 20th century, and then when I was in college, and that was the age of really tyrannical music directors. But they were in those days, as in the 50s and 60s and 70s, those music directors conducted the vast majority of the concerts. But with the advent of the jet plane, a lot of conductors had careers that allowed them to do only conducting. They would conduct an orchestra in London for maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and then they'd go to Germany, and then they come to the United States, and that saved them from having any office responsibilities, so to speak, any duties behind a desk. All they had to do was make music, and that's still very much the way the industry works today.
So who chooses the program? Who chooses the music for the
Programs.
the programs? Yes.
There had been in the time that I was in the business, there evolved a position in the orchestra hierarchy of somebody who was not the music director necessarily, but somebody who planned all the programs and was responsible for making sure that they were appropriate. They weren't bumping into each other. And that was necessary because of all the guest conductors that were in the business by that time. When I was in school and going to Cleveland Orchestra concerts, I knew very well that George Sell was the music director, and he called all of the shots. But that's no longer the case in terms of the repertory.
But,
Rex, did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry, Linda. Go ahead, Linda.
but the music director has some input, do they not, with the board or something of symphonies, what the
Yes.
co is going to be?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. It's a hierarchy. There's no question about that.
Brooke, and I understand that you are still involved. I have been going to several elementary schools, and there you are playing and encouraging kids. I just want to say thank you for all that you have done with our young children who have now grown into mature symphony people.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yes.
That is one of the advantages of a professional symphony orchestra. And under Lawrence's guidance and David
Rogers.
guidance,
Yeah.
they're carrying on the orchestra players going into schools and playing school concerts
Yes.
and
Wonderful.
and running the Yakima Youth Symphony Orchestra, which
That's
started
awesome.
in about the second or third year of our symphony orchestra existence. And then they're also supporting Yakima Music in Action.
Mhm.
Yes.
Rex and
Rex, how about
Kathy.
Rex and then Kathy. Rex.
All right. First of all, being a newcomer to the Yakima area, I want to thank you so very much for this presentation. The history and all that is, I find extremely fascinating, and I look forward to beginning to attend the Yakima Orchestra in the future now that I'm retired and in the area. But my question is a curiosity question. When you said that you were able to have people from Spokane, Tri-Cities, Ellensburg, well, Ellensburg is not, but Seattle, that were in the orchestra, did they come over here and just stay in the area during the rehearsal week? And if so,
Yes.
did the orchestra offer a stipend to them for living here for a week?
No.
Or is that on their own?
No, the orchestra, the orchestra, these are, generally speaking, these are, what's the word for it? I'm going to miss it.
Freelancer,
They don't have,
freelance.
they're freelancers. They're freelancers. And they're here for the entire, the week of the rehearsals and the concert. They stay in homes, volunteer homes. We have the principal bass player staying with us, Bren Plummer. And there is, Larry, you may know this, but they are paid for transportation, and there is a financial recognition that they don't live here. They have to get here, stay here, and buy lunch and dinner and get home.
And the musicians who come,
Larry?
the musicians who come forego earnings in their home communities that they achieve as teachers. They don't stay all week, but they come usually on Thursday.
Oh,
Or Friday.
Has to take time off from work.
Depends on the nature of the concert.
Yeah.
The full symphonic classical concerts usually involve at least one more rehearsal than the pops concerts.
Yeah, the orchestra's rehearsal schedule now is much more intense than it was when I was with the orchestra. Our configuration was a Tuesday rehearsal. I mean, this is with all the players. It was a Tuesday rehearsal, a Thursday rehearsal, a Friday rehearsal, and then Saturday was a dress rehearsal with Saturday evening performance. It is now squeezed into Thursday night, then 2 rehearsals on Friday, and a rehearsal on Saturday with the performance Saturday night. That's the classical series.
Kathy?
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things I've always thought was really intriguing about the symphony is the fact that the guest artists that come sometimes are just getting started on their career. And I remember the very first time Dennis and I got season tickets, it was that lady violinist that became really famous. Her first name was Nadia.
Not just Salerno Sonnenberg.
Yes. And that was the very first symphony we ever saw was that.
Oh,
Wow.
She came back, I think, a few years later after she had become really, really famous.
yes.
And it was really cool to have somebody here that was that famous and so forth. Did we have other people that fit that description where we kind of got them before they took off?
John Flan.
Jonathan Bavuzet, but his French and his career really took off.
Pianist.
He is a pianist in
he's really
plays it frequently in New York, but he's very, very well respected and busy in Europe.
Yeah, I just always thought that was a really cool
I'd like
asset
to
of.
jump in and
Larry, you're breaking up.
well, let's see if I can voice this. Talking about famous players, the symphony has scheduled the contemporary great violinist Joshua Bell to perform as part of the celebration of the first 50 years of Yakima Symphony Orchestra and the next 50 years. Did that come through?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow, that's great.
That is great.
He is the number one, or not, there's not one number one, but he is at the top of the violinist world.
yeah.
Wow. TJ?
Well, we were talking about the instruments, and I think it's interesting that Brooke's instrument was the bass, which is very big to haul. But can you tell us where your bass lives now? How they move on?
Oh, yeah. Were instruments. I had a German instrument made in Germany about 120 years ago now. And I don't know how it got to the United States, but it had five strings, which is common in Europe. It had been misused by somebody I think in Portland, but I bought it and played it for 20 or 25 years.
More than that. Well,
Yeah, and there was a German exchange student here, lived in Sunnyside. I don't know how he survived, but he took some lessons from me, which was totally unnecessary because he could play circles around me. Anyway, he went back to Germany. He got a position in the Staatskapelle Weimar Orchestra, did double bass, and he always was interested in my instrument. And the maker of my instrument was famous in Germany, and German orchestras, all bass double bass music for orchestra, there are notes below the lowest string on a double bass that it is called double bass because it doubled the bass line, which was played by the cellos, and that bass was just there to double them. But the cellos can get down to a low C, and the basses can only get down to an E. So they either have to put a machine on the bass or add a string. and the Germans added the string. So he wanted that bass, and eventually we made a deal, and he came over and with an empty bass case about what, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
with a bass case, and picked the instrument up and paid me in cash, so we never had to report anything. And my bass went back to the country of its origin.
Oh, that's neat. Yay.
Did you get pictures
That's
of
good.
it?
Yeah, I guess
That's a
that's-
neat story. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good one. Yeah.
So, Larry, did you have another comment? No. Okay, great. How about you? Or were you going to say something, Erwina? You've hosted a lot of the performers, right?
I have, and at one time I started, and I'm sorry that I had got in late because I was in a meeting of myself before, and so I played the violin a long time ago. And Brooke, I was trying to think, that was when we were playing at the over at, well, it was the stage at the well, it's where the I think it was the stage over on 16th. It was there was a place at I think it was 16th or 24th. Might have been 24th. There was a little stage there that I played the violin. I do remember because I played in the symphony in the University of Nebraska. And I came out, and it was the first couple years. And then I got busy and I didn't play much after that. But I don't remember it was, but that's where we started. And I don't think you were at that time. I don't think you were the director.
Yeah, okay. Are you thinking of Perry Tech?
Perry Tech. Well, yeah, but it was a small Perry Tech at the time.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Erwina, you get to go on and look at the full show because he did tell us all about that before you came on, and you.
Oh, did it? Okay, I
recognize
will
it.
look at it. And then
Yeah.
did you also talk about when we're going to get to start to hear the symphony again?
I wish. We don't know.
Oh, you don't know. Okay, I've heard rumors. That's why I wanted to get it from your perspective.
I after the year we've been through, I'm not going to make any predictions.
Well, I'm
and
sorry.
your daughter played in the youth symphony, right?
Yes, she did. And she was the one that at Davis, that they had barely started the youth symphony when she played. And
Yeah.
so she has a son that is graduating out of music. He can play any wind instrument. So he's a band. Yeah. He'll graduate in May
Great. Well, good.
from
Well,
college.
I
Hey,
have a,
Delma. Oh,
Delma.
Delma, then Rex.
Before we close, to tell Brooke, I hope he realizes how much we appreciate his gift to this community. It has added so much to our enjoyment of our lives here, and want him to really know we all feel that way.
Amen.
Yeah, bravo.
I will.
Yay.
I will say the community gave much more, gave me everything I could ever ask for a career. I'm grateful to the community. They let me make mistakes and stuck with me.
You stuck with us. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Rex, you want to say something?
well, I do, but you may want to answer this after the session is over, but I would like to know how to get in line for getting tickets, maybe season tickets for the orchestra when it opens back up again, and what it costs and who to get in touch with to do it.
248-1414, no, 248-14, yeah, 248-1414.
Okay, Chrissy can send that out with the video.
Yeah, they're just now moving back into the office, into their offices. They've been haven't been allowed to do business in the Miller Building. I mean, not in the Miller Building, that goes back way, in the Liberty Building, but they're moving back in right now. But 248-1414, which is easy to remember because 2, 4, and 8 equal 14. So it's 14, 14, 14.
All right, 248-1414.
Yes, that's the symphony office.
Nice.
Thank you.
14, 14.
Okay, he's always counting up card tabs and telling me what the numbers add up to. So this is not unusual.
There's a link with
Great.
musicians and numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Quarter time,
Yes.
halftime,
Yeah.
whole time.
All right. Well, this has been a wonderful chance to learn so much more about the history. Brooke, you put so much
Yeah.
great work into it and revealed so many things that a lot of us did not know. I appreciate that. And Inga, thanks for the introduction.
Well,
What a
that was
great-
easy.
What a great chance to share things with Brooke and thank him again for this event, but for all of the things he's given the community. So we appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
bravo.
we'll hit the
Thank,
road.
thank-
Yay.
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Great. All
Thank
right.
you.
Very fun to
So
hear.
we zoom out.
Okay, zooming out. Here we
Thanks,
go.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Susie.
Can't find it.
Is this yours or mine?
That's mine.
Where's my?
Delma, Inga.
No, that's yours. Mine is over there.
Oh, okay.
I can't sign off from.
Oh, there we go.
I think I'm gonna hit the button. Good night, everybody.
Good night.